Want to expand the reach of your content? Start a podcast. Feature industry experts on your show and leverage the influence and reach of your guests to grow your brand. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Chad Sanderson. He is managing partner over at ValueSelling Associates and the host of the B2B Revenue Executive Experience podcast. Chad, how are you doing today, man?
I am doing great. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Absolutely, man. You are obviously, as most people probably know, a multi-repeat guest here on B2B Growth, but I'm really excited because
of me.
Exactly, man. Well, it's phenomenal to work with you. Every conversation when you and I get to talk sales is always, just edifying and valuable for me. But it's special for me today because this is, James has been hogging you. This is the first time I've actually got to interview you here on the show. So for folks who aren't as familiar with you as James and I are and the team at Sweetfish in working with you and your team, Chad, tell us a little bit more about Chad Sanderson and what you and the team at ValueSelling Associates are up to these days, man.
Yeah, so we work with organizations, regardless of industry, sector, whatever, to help them articulate value throughout the organization. Normally, this shows up in sales forces. So how do we train sales forces to uncover a buyer's perception of value and connect to it? Not what do you do step by step. There's 100,000 people out there that will tell you with these 223 steps, you can close a deal. Everybody kind of gets that. What we're talking about is working with organizations to transform their value articulation. And we work with sales, marketing, consultants, anybody who has a client-facing role or somehow touches revenue. We work to train and transform those organizations so they can achieve their business objectives.
I love it, man. Tell us a little bit about your background in sales, for folks who don't know you, how you got into the training and enablement space.
That's a great question. I actually started my career in marketing, believe it or not. And for the first 10 years of my career, I actually started in analyst relations and PR and then moved into communications and ended up running a marketing organization for a software company. After about 10 years and literally 48 hours after I had gotten my MBA focused on marketing, I dropped out of the marketing game and went into sales. I took over a territory and decided to join, quote unquote, the dark side. So I carried a bag for 5, 6 years, 7 years, was a top performer, consistently hitting my number because I had been trained in the very framework that I train people on today. From there, it was run sales organizations, build them from the ground up, then build sales and marketing organizations. And then that enabled me to work with an executive team that sold the company to KPMG. And fast forward a couple more years, and the gentleman who actually originally in value selling, and I think it was 18 years ago, called me up and said, "Hey, you are one of the most passionate users of this approach. You need to come help us grow the business. Our business is booming. Come be a part of it." And so I took the jump and went from running the teams to now working from the outside to transform the organizations. And it's one of the things that kind of sets our whole team apart is that we are all people who are proven sales professionals. We are 100% commission sales reps today, even though we run our own business. Mm-hmm. And we just have the opportunity to work with these organizations to give them a framework that allows them to, again, uncover a buyer's perception of value rather than just talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I love hearing your backstory. You've got this 360 view on sales, right? From marketing and PR to selling to now training sellers and actively selling yourself. So, for folks, again, who haven't heard you talk, aren't tuned into your podcast, I'm really excited again, not only because every time we get to chat, it's fun, but you've got a very unique perspective on the world of B2B sales. So today we're going to be talking about what you refer to as the new B2B sales experience. And, you mentioned working with sales, marketing, I imagine you guys touch customer success as well. Everyone that's in, a customer facing role. Tell us a little bit about, this role of almost frictionless expectations and how that's changing the selling game.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about it, probably the vast majority of people that are listening to this podcast, if they pull out their phone and open it up, they're going to have the Amazon app on their phone, whether it be because they like the free music, they like the 24-hour, 48-hour, or hour delivery. The vast majority of people listening right now will have Amazon Prime accounts and they'll have that application on their phone. And so if you think about that for a second, why do we respond so well to that? It's because applications like that, not just Amazon, but others, give us what we want, when we want, how we want it, tailored to us based on our buying behavior. So that's just one example. But if you look at companies from Apple to Verizon to British Airways, you name it, over the last 10 years, there's been massive investments in customer experience, which is how do I engage with a customer that allows me to maintain a deeper relationship, a longer relationship, and quite honestly, maximize the customer lifetime value from that individual. How do I basically keep my hand in their wallet longer and have them be okay with it? And so as a result of that, all of these B2B buyers live B2C lives where all of these customer experience changes have happened. And now, whether they're aware of it or not, they're actually bringing those same expectations into their buying and thinking about buying B2B solution. So they don't, everybody used to say, okay, don't sell to people they don't want to be sold to. Well, no kidding. That's not anything new. Nobody's ever wanted to be sold to unless you catch them at exactly the right moment. Now it's become even more imperative to not sell, but to collaborate, to understand not what you're bringing to the party, but what it is they want you to bring to the party. And so it's about how do you have a conversation that allows you to consistently uncover that buyer's perception of the problems they face, the solutions they want, and the value they have to have in order to buy. Now, a lot of this sounds common sense. This actually isn't a new talk track if you think about it, but people have been talking about this crap for years, long before I got into the game. What makes it different is that before it sounded like a good idea. Just sounded like, hey, I think I might be able, that makes sense. I buy that. Today, it's become an imperative. Your buyers will switch, turn away from, jump to somebody else, anybody who isn't going to sell them, but who's going to give them that frictionless experience. Meaning, don't make it hard to buy from me. Don't sell me. Don't tell me about you. Listen to me. And it's, again, nothing new in that talk track. What has changed, because sales very rarely changes, is the context in which we're operating. And that context in which we're operating has a level of customer experience expectation built into all B2B buyers that if the sellers today are not aware of, if they don't tweak the way they approach these people, if they do not do it consistently and with precision, they are injecting friction into the sales process, sacrificing, win rate, deal size, sales cycles get longer, so on and so forth. All of the typical metrics, but they get impacted for a different reason today than what most people will sit around and tell you about.
Yeah, I just finished a great book from Todd Capone. I think you've had him on your podcast as well, Chad, talking about a great, very smart guy. And one of the things he kept reiterating in his book, The Transparency Sale, is that our brains are hardwired to resist being sold to. And, that's always been true. That's true of, it's been true of our amygdalas for a long, long time. But as you pointed out, there are different consequences now, and people are looking for help more than they're looking to be sold to. We've known that for a while, but there are still these bad behaviors of, just trying to sell more than you're trying to help. And one of the things that you've touched on before, Chad, is that, there are actually organizational structures that are reinforcing those bad habits of overselling and as opposed to helping and really delivering value. What are some of those that you see in the maybe not name names, maybe not in the organizations that you work with, but what are some of those things that you see that sales leaders should be on the lookout for?
Well, if you think about how organizations are structured historically, right? It's very hierarchical, right? There's a CEO at the top. He's got, your C-suite, and then from there it goes down. And when you get into sales organizations, it's typically still hierarchical as well. You'll have a regional vice president or an area vice president. Maybe it's a geo vice president. Then below there, there'll be, account execs. You'll have potentially customer success built in, or sometimes they're in a different silo altogether. You've got channel people. You've got SDRs or BDRs that are out there trying to fill the top of the funnel. Then it really is just a cascade, right? Cascade of roles. And in some ways, it's an artifact of a bygone time, to be honest, because those structures were set up when organizations could say, this is how I want you to sell. And much like the iPhone changed who was in control of experience, like the iPhone put the control into the user's hands. For the first time in software, a user could delete an experience they didn't like in under 2-3 seconds. I mean, everybody's probably deleted crap off of their iPhone. I know I do it on a regular basis. And we vote with our thumbs in that case. Well, the businesses, those expectations, like I talked about, come with those buyers, but the organizations in which these people operate have not evolved. And so that hierarchical approach almost creates a train effect. So let's just assume that, hey, an SDR calls me, they set a meeting. I've got a 15-minute meeting with them next week. We have that call. Then I set up another call. We bring in an AE. AE is going to talk to me, further qualify me. And maybe I'm going to set up a demo, bring an SME in, subject matter expert in. And then you get them through the sales process. And now I have to introduce them to customer success. And there's all of these handoffs that happen in these hierarchical organizations that were built that way so those organizations could have predictability, or what they felt was predictability in the bottom line. And so as an artifact of that, we have these sales structures that actually are working against sales teams, sales organizations. And what we're seeing be more effective today is more of a pod approach. And this isn't something I came up with. I won't take credit for it, but it just makes sense where you create these pods, these teams that have all of those roles on them. And those roles are all focused on a specific industry, or they're focused on a specific sector. And so I'll have an SDR that works with an AE, that works with an SME, and they work together as a team, and a customer success manager. And they're all involved continually throughout the process to reduce the friction of handoff. They understand from the beginning the evolution that buyer is going through. You also, from a structural standpoint, can then better target. Do you feel like going vertical? Do you feel like going geo? Do you feel like going public sector versus private? And you can build these teams. There's different ways you can configure these pods that allow you to have a team that is consistent and walks the entire journey with those customers. I can adjust the pod rather than trying to cross-coordinate multiple hierarchical silos in order to get individuals, to respond to a regulatory change.
Yeah, the change might be like herding sheep instead of herding, an entire meadow of cats.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there, and that makes sense. I mean, I've obviously talked to other sales leaders, Chad, who have sales teams focused on different verticals. But really, when we look at the customer experience, when they're going from SDR to AE to customer success, subject matter experts in there in the middle of the sales cycle, they're not typically engaged with one tight-knit group that is always dealing with folks in their world, whether that's by vertical or by geography or something like that. But I'd imagine that the teamwork in those pods starts to get better, and that impacts the customer experience, and they get better at serving that specific market, again, whether it's a geographic area or a vertical market. And so the customer experience is actually better over time. And I think we all identify that we need to map and improve the entire customer experience, which is not just sales, not just marketing, not just customer success, but we don't really know how to implement it. So I like what you're saying here. What else would you say, this structure could do for customer experience, or how we could actually look at, making tactical changes to improve the customer experience, Chad?
Well, if you think about how people interact with in that hierarchical way, right? And it depends. You mentioned you could have a different SME come in and out of an account, but depending on who's available. Well, you as an
round robin style, right?
Round robin, and then customer success. Well, don't get me started. It could be 4 or 5 different people over the lifetime. Whereas if you have a pod, all of the things that you mentioned are accurate. But what I like to see the most is each pod develops its own personality almost based on what each of the individuals in that pod are bringing to the table. So you have a greater sense of authenticity and a greater sense of unity from first contact through value realization that a hierarchical organization just can't give you. It also gives management the ability to better articulate and understand how those individuals work within the true team environment. Like we all love to say sales team, but like how often is it really a sales team? It's usually, hey,
Right.
you have a quota, and if you didn't hit your quota, out the door you go. And
Right.
that creates friction internally. And if you're creating friction internally, your customers, your buyers are going to feel that. Whereas if you take a team and you get them to the point where they can gel, and you give them very clear cut metrics they have to hit to advance from, say, a pod member to a pod lead to an area manager, right, of multiple pods inside of it. It gives you the ability to really test and see what the strengths are those individuals are bringing and whether or not that can be applicable outside of that pod. You can test moving people up into management because everybody out there knows, I know a lot of these people that were amazing individual contributors, but absolutely sucked as managers. And that can have a really detrimental impact on an organization. Well, this way you have a way to test that, to still respond to the millennial need for promotion and advancement, but do it in a way where if it doesn't go well, then the impact is easier to manage. It gives them the opportunity to learn from failure rather than put them in a high-risk situation where failure could negatively impact the organization as a whole. So that type of flexible, and I'm not saying pods are the only answer. It's the one that I think most people probably are familiar with or have seen before. There are other flexible structures that work. It's just in order to do that, I prefer, much like in customer success, to build a sales team from the buyer or the customer back, not build it to surround them, assuming we understand them. And it's a subtle shift, but it drives amazing differences in results and impact for the organization as a whole.
Yeah. Would you say it makes a big difference in the way that you can ramp up and train and coach sales reps as well? I mean, I imagine one of the aspects is as they focus on selling to the niche that their pod focuses on, then they get better, they get sharper, faster. Anything else, from the enablement of those specific sales reps that is enhanced in these sorts of flexible structures?
Absolutely. You have more opportunity to coach because it can be coaching on real time. You're not trying to cross silos. Like, let's assume you're a sales manager in a hierarchical organization. You're only responsible for the AEs, but your AEs rely on SMEs or let's just say customer success, which is often a different silo. You have to then go to their manager to get approval to help them coach, blah, blah, blah. And by the time you do all of that, the coachable moment, which is a little touchy-feely for me, but it's true. The coachable moment has passed. And now we go back to coach them and they're like, what? Like, that was 2 weeks ago. I'm over that. Whereas if you have the teams together, you have a much more effective, immediate response time to coachable moments, and you can do it within a team. So coaching, number one, you can coach them up faster. You can actually reduce time to revenue in a flexible environment. Because I saw a stat the other day where one of the clients I was talking to said it takes 9 months, give or take 9 to 12 months before a rep is actually what they would consider ready to generate revenue. That's a lot of lift. That's a lot of lift on a lot of expense for an organization. But you put them in a team that's a flexible team, then you can decrease the time to revenue for them in a safe environment, help them self-discover. And how fast they self-discover and how fast that team gels also as a manager gives you insight into how they're going to potentially work or how to most effectively coach them. So from a coaching standpoint, that's huge. And we all know that the workforce coming up today wants more of that coaching. They want more of that feedback. It's a critical component to making organizations operate in the business context that we exist in. And if you don't give them that, then you have attrition. And we just ran we just did a webinar 2 weeks ago with an executive from NCR talking about his experience in this very situation. And we had one of the serious decision analysts on. And he showed, if anybody wants a link, I'll shoot it over to you, include it with the episode. But he showed this analysis that they did where sales attrition on average per 3 individuals that you lose on a sales team can cost an organization almost $500,000 between recruiting fees, lost opportunity, lost revenue opportunity, upspin, onboarding, all of this. Now, think about that. Normal attrition inside of a sales organization can range anywhere from 28 to 34%, give or take. So that was estimating a 15% turnover in a team of 20. Imagine how that number escalates over time. So we have to take into account that not only do our buyers want frictionless, but our sellers need frictionless. And if you don't marry those two, the organizational with the way you're enabling them to consistently outreach to new buyers and to new prospects, you're going to create friction, which gives your competition the ability to swoop in and either take your team or take the client, beat you in the sales game, or you're going to have an instability in your organization, which is just going to compromise your top line of revenue or your objective goals from the minute you hit the field. So we have to really pay attention to it. And I understand for some of the more experienced sales executives, it's probably the right way to say that. People like myself, people like myself who come from an era where phones had cords, those people probably struggle with this a little bit. Right. And I'll be honest, I struggled with it at first too, because I came up in a sales culture of this is your target, go get it done or get out. I was lucky enough to have people that invested in the coaching, but it's no longer a nice to have. It isn't a nice to have, much like you cannot be creating friction for your buyers. If you're not setting up your organization to reduce friction on your sales team and optimize their ability to generate revenue, to work as a team, to be authentic, then you have basically created a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely, man. I love how you brought it back around to that frictionless experience and those expectations that we have as consumers, because the people on our sales team, they live B2C lives just like our B2B buyers live B2C lives, right? And so marrying those two and looking at both sides of the coin, I think is very helpful. Now, making the transition and large organizational changes may be tougher for folks at different stages, but you've definitely got me thinking a little bit differently about this as we, build our team here at Sweetfish. We kind of have the benefit of being, earlier in our growth stage where a lot of these organizational structures aren't in place yet. So if folks are further along this journey, Chad, but they like what you're saying and they would like to follow up with you to learn more or see some examples that you could point them to in your network, that sort of stuff, or they just want to stay connected with you, Chad, what's the best way for them to reach out or stay connected with you, man?
So I'll make this super simple for your audience because number one, I'm a big believer in something called a phone, with or without a cord. I don't care. So my phone number is 303-834-5932. For those of you out there that don't know that your phone actually does make calls, you can hit me at chad.sanderson@valueselling.com. And for those of you that only have social installed on your phones, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can't miss me. Bald as a baby's butt with a graying red goatee, looking rather dapper in a gray shirt. Chad Sanderson, managing partner at ValueSelling
Very dapper, man. Absolutely. All right. No excuse. We've made it easy for, millennials, Gen X, everybody, baby boomers, everybody in between to connect with Chad. If you can't tell, I love this guy. I think he's full of valuable knowledge on sales, marketing. I can't imagine you in the PR role, but we're going to come back to that later, man. But in any event, man, Chad, it was fantastic to talk with you and for me to finally get the chance to interview you here on B2B Growth, man. Thank you so much for making the time.
I love it. My pleasure. Thanks again for having me on.
You bet, man. We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.